ready? Want to feel it?
Hello and welcome to the All Good Stories podcast, where we believe all good stories belong to Jesus. When we look for Jesus in the stories around us, we find him more fully in our own. We're your hosts, Chris Bowden
and Simon Campbell, two millennial dads who love pop culture and making connections from the content we love to the God who loves us.
And in episode 9, we're joined by a very special guest, our very first guest on the podcast, Taylor Mugge, host of the Hidden Acres podcast, as we discover the power of true love and find the good stories in The Princess Bride.
Taylor, we're so glad to have you on this podcast. Taylor's an old friend of mine. We go way back. Taylor is the summer ministry manager?
One of two summer ministry managers, yeah.
At Hidden Acres Christian Center, and hosts the Hidden Acres podcast, which kind of goes through the life of the camp and what's going on and what people should be aware of. But I have to tell the story of when I first met Taylor. Are you ready for this?
I don't like where this is going.
I am so excited already.
So Taylor and I worked together at Hidden Acres back in the day. So I was 16.
Yeah, 2006, 7?
Yes.
8?
2006 was my first summer. So I was 16. I was starting my first summer as a junior camp counselor. And I remember I'd never been there before. I was getting my stuff into the cabin area, and I knew I was supposed to go to like some kind of orientation, but I didn't know where to go, and I didn't know anyone. And then up pulls this old silver Honda. What was it? Like
a 1987 Honda Accord LXI. That was the good one. That was the one you wanted.
Yes.
Let's go.
But I just remember all of like the bumper stickers and like tape on it.
Duct tape racing stripes, yes. They're homemade, believe it or not.
Please tell me this was silver duct tape on a silver car.
It was.
Is that
yes? It's in the background of one of my. I took some senior pictures with it. Actually, it's like in the background. I kind of wanted to make fun of the guys in my school who had like really awesome cars. I had my 1987 Honda Accord with duct tape racing stripes in the background.
But I do remember as I was getting into the car, because you're like, want to ride? And I was like, okay.
Yeah, I could have been a total stranger, not even worked at the camp.
You got in the 1980s.
Yeah. Well, I remember
this guy. Terrible lesson.
I just remember Taylor gets out of this car. He's got his like classic knee-high hiking socks on and a bandana, and he literally throws his 3 bags through the door into the cabin and says, "Want to ride?" And I was like, "Okay." I mean, I don't know where I'm going. And I remember
there were no red flags for you in this moment.
I remember as I was getting into the car that there was this bumper sticker on it that said, "My other ride is the Millennium Falcon." And I was like, I don't know why that detail, it sticks in my memory. So I get in the car, and instead of like driving back down the drive, like the road, Taylor starts driving down the hiking trail.
Yeah, the woods, drove through the woods.
Through the woods on the backside of the cabin area. And we have literally like a half-inch clearance on either side from the mirrors, and just like slogging down this like walking trail. And I just remember just kind of being completely swept up. It felt like I knew you for a lot longer. And you just kind of took me in. And I know that by the end of this episode, because of who you are, I know that the listeners will feel real close to you by the end of the episode, because with Taylor Mugge, everybody's friend.
Simon, that's the nicest introduction I could have paid you to do, and I'll send you the check later. No, that car was so skinny, it could fit in any way. It could fit through like a normal-sized door. It was the skinniest, smallest car. It was incredible. It's a delight to be here. I'm so glad to join you guys. Love what you guys are doing. So excited to be a part of it. To get to talk about literally my favorite movie and, spoiler alert, my favorite book.
I knew we had to talk to Taylor when we decided to do The Princess Bride. This wouldn't be complete for me without a conversation with Taylor.
So, speaking of The Princess Bride, if there are any of us out there who haven't seen this since the late 80s, Simon, walk us through the story, man.
Yeah, so the story of The Princess Bride opens on a boy being homesick.
Homesick or homesick?
No, yeah, not homesick.
At home.
Sick at home.
And much to his chagrin, his grandfather has come to read him a fairy tale titled The Princess Bride. And it's the story of the beautiful Buttercup, played by Robin Wright, who falls for farm boy As You Wish Wesley. And he goes off to make his fortune. But after news of his death, Buttercup is being married off to Prince Humperdinck. But before they can marry, the Princess Bride gets kidnapped by 3 rogues, and all the while is being pursued by a mysterious hero in black who seeks to rescue the princess from their clutches. And through the terrors of the fire swamp, the torture of the pit of despair, we are won over by a story that shows us that not even death can stop the power of true love.
Do you mean true love? True love?
Yeah, I knew it. Thank you.
So when this originally came out in 1987, it brought in 30.8 million, which is about double what it cost to produce at 16 million, which is modest, but typically a good marker of success in showbiz, kind of double whatever your production budget was. So that's great. However, this is another one of those films that after being released on the home video market originally, it's quickly become one of the largest cult classics of all time. It's still considered one of the most quotable movies, as you two have proven already. And many of the actors have shared in different interviews over time that they still have people shouting these quotes at them everywhere they go, particularly Wallace Shawn, who has very famously grabbed the word inconceivable for all of us. And he's still just suffering through having that thrown at him constantly.
I did hear that Mandy Patinkin, who played Inigo Montoya,
Yes.
he loves hearing, "Hello, my name is Inigo Montoya." He loves hearing people say
Just
that to him
eats that
because
up.
he's like, it's a great line. Why wouldn't I love hearing
It
that?
is a
over
great
and over
line.
again?
This movie, amazingly enough, has a 96% critics review on Rotten Tomatoes, and to follow that, 94% by the audience rating. Not only are these super high, but they are super close to each other, which is so rare. So this is a largely beloved movie by everybody. Like I said, it's super, super quotable, and it also has the distinct honor of being selected by the Library of Congress in 2016 for the preservation in the United States National Film Registry. So guys, if everything goes to crap someday, we still got the Princess Bride locked down somewhere.
That's all we
It's
need.
not going anywhere. How'd you guys first encounter the Princess Bride? How'd you first hear about it? What's your connection to it?
So first off, I, like most people, probably watched it when I was too young to watch it. Got exposed to it. I think most people watch it like when their older siblings or parents are watching it, and you're like, that's kind of scary. But then my high school youth group, we just loved it. For some reason, it was just like our youth group movie. We'd hang out, play board games, and be like, Princess Bride. It was Princess Bride and like Spaceballs and Uncle Buck and just like late 80s, early 90s, just like.
That is a very specific like pie chart,
Yes,
like of a
exactly
certain
right, yeah.
movie era. That's right.
So we would watch these movies a lot. And then late in high school, I discovered that it was a book before it was a movie. And so I was like, well, I love books. I got to find this book.
Yeah.
I couldn't find an unabridged version. Have you guys had this experience of trying to
What?
find The Princess Bride?
No.
No, I didn't.
Everywhere.
I didn't even know it was a book until
So you Google
this
it.
moment. So catch
If
me
you
up.
just Google it and you say Princess Bride book, the only thing that will show up is abridged by William Goldman. And I was like searching, where's the unabridged version? I don't want the abridged version. I want the unabridged Princess Bride.
Wow.
Looked and looked and looked. Eventually discovered there is no unabridged version. So here,
It's just in the title.
so it's called S. Morgenstern's Classic Tale of True Love and High Adventure, The Princess Bride. And then in the cover, it says right there, the Good Parts version, abridged by William Goldman. Here's the secret. There is no S. Morgenstern. There is no unabridged version.
This is incredible. So from
William
the very
Goldman.
beginning, this
Yes.
thing is messing with you. It
Yes.
has always been this way.
And when William Goldman wrote this, he wrote it actually, the framing narrative in the movie of like the sick child being read to, that is actually in the book. So
Oh, really?
So the framing narrative in the book is that William Goldman, when he was a kid, his father, who was an immigrant, would read him this book from his home country called The Princess Bride. And he would read it every time he was sick, and it would help him get better. And then when he got older, this is all completely made up, by the way.
Yeah.
William
This
Goldman-
backstory
So much
is
better.
just made up.
Exactly. Like William Goldman, and then he gets older. He has a son who's like estranged from him, and he's like, I need to like reach out to my son. I know. I'll send him Princess Bride. So he sends him the book, and his son is like, what the heck is this? It's not even in English. So William Goldman apparently gets the book. He reads through it. He's like, oh my goodness, this is in another language. My father was translating it, and he was abridging it. There is a story, but it's like,
there are so many layers to this.
oh my goodness, and it's so fantastic. So yes, the book, I finally found that there was no abridged version. I bought it. I've read it probably more than any book besides the Bible. So this is literally my number 2 most read book.
We went to college together after camp, and I had not seen the movie prior to that. And then the other part is like Taylor had a public reading in one of the gathering areas.
Story time with Uncle Taylor.
Yes,
This is
reading
painting
this
such
book
a clear
aloud
picture
to a
of
group
who
of
you are,
college
Taylor.
students. Yes.
This is great. And for college, that is exactly the right play. That will absolutely get people to show up for something. Like, I love
But the
that.
thing I love about that is like I had just presumed that the sort of cheekiness or the satire of how the story is set up and everything was something that they added to it. But the fact that that already exists in the book and you're just translating that to the screen, it makes it that much more brilliant in my mind.
And not only that, William Goldman, who wrote the book, he actually wrote the screenplay for the movie.
I noticed that in the credits that he was involved.
It is a seamless transition. It's the exact
so
same story.
good.
I'm not joking. It's got like the interruptions from the grandson. Like when the grandson like interrupts the grandfather and like...
Is this a kissing book?
Exactly. Like all that stuff.
Well, that's amazing because I actually think because of the budget of this movie and how it was made, I think that detail, the cutaway to the story of the grandson and the grandfather, that's the magic. Without that, I think the story falls flat. I think that the way it was made, the cheesiness of it, the sort of satire of how it's put together, I think that it would just be dismissed without that. Like, that's the magic of this movie. That's why we love it, because we're sort of experiencing being won over by this story at the same time as the narrator and the grandson.
Exactly.
Because I thought the same thing I was watching is like it gave us permission as an audience to endure the classic tropes and like the things that normally, you'd roll your eyes at, or the budget isn't up to snuff or whatever. And you just go, oh yeah, we're like in on the joke throughout.
Yes.
And that's such a great play.
Because it's told in this way that makes it look like an old story, you're like, oh, this was written before it was a trope. Maybe this is the source of those tropes.
And what I heard from Simon's story being introduced to this is just as a fake grandfather has passed it to the father to the son, Taylor, so you have passed this movie and its legacy on to Simon, who I am sure will inundate his own children with this someday as well.
Oh, yes.
I did try to watch it with my children. When you called me Simon, I was like, I gotta watch The Princess Bride again. Watch it with my kids. They are 10 and 7. They are too young. And as is the prime tradition, showing it to your kids when they're too young. They were not they were not fans. So it's all right.
Playing
It'll grow on
games
them.
until the shrieking eels show up, you know?
That's exactly right. No, the fire swamp, that's what got them.
What are the things in this movie that we just love geeking out over that we think in general help make this a good story?
I mean, one of the things to me is when you look at the cast of this movie, perfect. And because it's so unique, they didn't need huge names, but there are some in here.
Or people who became larger names as this went on. This was one of their first big entries.
But even Billy Crystal having the role that he did, a pretty minor role, just perfect. You get this like Lower East Side kind of feel from Magic Max. It's just so great.
Do you want to hear some actors that almost played Fezzik?
Yes, please.
Absolutely.
Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Nope.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the basketball player.
Oh, that would have been kind
Can you imagine him as Andre the Giant? And then Liam Neeson.
Too much gravitas.
Yeah, he would steal the show. He would not fit into the background like Andre the Giant does so masterfully. And then some actresses actually auditioned for Buttercup that later became famous. They were not famous then, but Courtney Cox, Uma Thurman, and Meg Ryan all auditioned for the part of Buttercup. They didn't get it.
Out of that group, I could probably see Meg Ryan.
As soon as I read that, I was like, yeah, that could have worked, but I mean, you can't get any better than Robin Wright.
I am not a huge watcher of The Princess Bride like y'all. I've seen it maybe 1 or 2 times in my life. And so for me, my association was, oh no, it's the scary woman from House of Cards.
Yeah.
That was my
true.
catch. I came in from a different starting point and went, wait a second. That's you as a child. Like this had to be one of her like first gigs.
It was.
In the credits, it's like introducing Robin Wright.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw her in Blade Runner 2049 and I was like, hey, it's Buttercup. I don't know.
I love that forever your mental reference will always be, no matter the role, Buttercup.
No matter what.
Yeah. She is. One of the things I love in this movie that I think is just magic, which I am sure also exists in the book now, is interspersing what feels like essentially normal conversation within the movie. They almost feel like cutaway moments. When you got Inigo and Wesley's conversation, like helping him up the cliff, and then like taking a moment to rest, and then talking about their sword skill. It's like, don't you suppose you could speed things up? And he's just like, I hate waiting. It's just all these little like cutaway moments throughout the movie that just feels like it's inviting us as the audience back in on the joke, where this is obviously a fantasy story, and at the same time, we're normal people who like break out of our own characters for these conversations. And I don't know if I know of any other movie that does that as seamlessly or effectively as this one. There's plenty of good breaking of the fourth wall in other movies, but this one isn't even that. It's not addressing us. It's not recognizing us. It's just a part of kind of a bit of the world. Like, this is just how we behave. This is how we talk. We're oddly polite.
One story I heard some of the actors were talking about was that the guy who was in the costume of the ROUS, this movie was made so low budget, he had to get dressed at home in the costume. and drive to the filming. And so he was driving in his car in an ROUS costume, got pulled over by the cops because of course he would. And the cop pulls him over and was like, what are you doing?
Somehow explain what's happening here.
Exactly. And so the cop followed him to the filming shoot to make sure that he wasn't like a total sicko.
It's very clear when you watch it. It's like, oh, that's a guy on his hands
100%.
and feet just running around.
There's something so magical about, I think, if we're talking about movie magic, I feel like this movie was made at such a nexus of so many different things that made it so right. Just the timing of when it was made and like the practical effects and the very just burgeoning field of special effects. And you've got these actors, and they're basically like stage actors who are primarily focused on each other, right? Like they're talking to each other. They're not talking to the camera like you were talking about. Like this movie, I don't think it could have been made 5 years earlier or 5 years later and been anywhere near as marvelous. Like it was just a perfect alignment of the stars that just made it work so well.
Which is connected to my last piece of movie magic, which is also a timepiece of just the 1980s movies and their lack of concern for children's nightmares. It's just
so true.
Between the screaming eels and the ROUSs, you've got nightmares galore.
I remember
literal torture in this movie. Like literally gets tortured.
Why is quicksand such a big deal? I remember being, as a kid, terrified that I'm going to walk into quicksand.
It's everywhere.
This is a common problem.
That's exactly right. So we have all this stuff of nightmares packed in that I think is so true. Like Never-Ending Story falls into that one. I'm even thinking of something that's a little closer to my heart and like still tamer for kids is like The Page Master when that came out was a really popular one.
Good one.
That's a deep cut movie.
The Black Cauldron, there's that one. That one's up there for me too.
That was terrifying.
Is a very good one.
Yes.
Or sad too. Like they inflicted childhood trauma on so much. Like when Littlefoot's mom dies in Land Before Time.
Land Before
Yes.
Time.
How dare you!
Oh my gosh.
It's a tough world out there,
awful.
kids. Get used to it. Welcome to the 90s.
Yeah, that's right. That's why we're all so tough. Wait a second.
So that's some of the movie magic of just some details and fun stuff we love about The Princess Bride. But we think there's an opportunity in all these good stories to see Jesus in each of them. And so we want to take time just unpacking, hey, where do we see Jesus uniquely on display in this story through these characters and what it's trying to communicate to us?
When I look at The Princess Bride, one of the things that stands out to me that belongs to Jesus is this relentless pursuit of Wesley pursuing Buttercup. And really, like, if she's the Princess Bride, this is the relentless pursuit of the bride. And I think that that's something that belongs to Jesus, absolutely, because throughout Scripture, we are identified as the bride of Christ. Whether you're in Isaiah, whether you're in Revelation, whether you're in the New Testament letters, the church is identified, the people of God are identified as the bride of Christ. And God is the relentless pursuer of his bride. Jesus is the groom relentlessly pursuing his bride. You know, Isaiah 62, your children will commit themselves to you, O Jerusalem, just as a young man commits himself to his bride. God will rejoice over you as a bridegroom rejoices over his bride. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. I think that when we look at the love that's being described between the characters of Wesley and Buttercup, we are describing this relentless pursuit that Wesley has throughout the movie, overcoming incredible odds, even death, and pursuing his bride. And one of the reasons why I think people fall in love with this character of Wesley is just because we all want a hero that nothing is going to stop them from pursuing love. Nothing is going to stop their love. Nothing is going to stop their faithfulness. And so when we talk about longing for a hero like that, I think you look no further than the person of Jesus, who overcomes sin, death, the grave, out of a relentless pursuit and love for his bride, the church.
And I think a little bit of the magic in the story here for both Wesley and then also for Jesus is that they really both know what lies ahead of them as a result of choosing that path. It's not an easier path because that's where they're going. Like Wesley, I'm sure at any point could be like, boy, it'd be a lot easier if I was over this chick and could just bounce, you know? And sure, Jesus has moments of, these 12 dudes just don't get it. And this sucks. You know, like this is not a fun road to be on. And yet seeing the obstacles, seeing the challenge and going, you are worth it. You're worth that cost. I think is something that's easy for us to forget. I think even just individually, when we're thinking about our relationship with Jesus, that Jesus says, you were and you are worth everything that I've endured, everything that I've been through. In the same way that Wesley, whether said or not, really goes, Buttercup is worth enduring all of these challenges, whether it's being at sea and finding his way back or making it through these trials and challenges or enduring torture even. There's a choice there and need those kind of reminders sometimes that Jesus says you are worth it.
I think building off what you guys are talking about, we, the church, are the bride of Christ. We were taken captive by the serpent in the garden. We were slaves of sin. We were married, essentially, to the wrong husband, right?
Yes.
But Jesus came to our rescue, in disguise, no less, died for us.
I love
and
that.
And now we're just waiting for the wedding at the end. And this story is so compelling because underneath, the silly costumes and the low budget and the acting and the fantastic dialogue and swordplay and all that is the story of redemption, our story. And it's a story that we all long for. We all want to be rescued, like you were saying, Simon.
Another thing that I think, you talked about this a little bit, but like the hero in disguise, unrecognized by Buttercup, Wesley, for a good portion of that first interaction after he's defeated the three rogues of Inigo, Fezzik, and Vicini. She doesn't know who this person is in disguise, and at some level kind of rejects him even. And I think that there's this sort of inconceivable nature, so to speak, of this hero. Like he's so inconceivable. When Buttercup is describing Wesley to this man in black, she describes him as poor and perfect. And that is the inconceivable nature of who Jesus is. He comes in humble origins. He is poor and perfect. And yet he's also inconceivable in the sense like Wesley is more skilled than Inigo, stronger than Fezzik, smarter than Vicini, and more miraculous than Max. We have all of these things wrapped up in this character of Wesley and this inconceivable nature. And he's overcoming inconceivable odds. And we see that in the person of Jesus too. We see somebody who endures trial for 40 days in the desert by Satan himself. We see somebody who heals the sick, who makes the blind to see, the lame to walk. These are inconceivable things that the character of Jesus does. And we see that same type of hero presented in the person of Wesley. And he comes in disguise and is rejected by those he is trying to save initially. Like those are all things that I think when you watch a story like this and you watch a compelling hero like Wesley, that's an opportunity. That's a chance for us to say, you see how we're drawn to this person. You see how inconceivable this hero is. And I think that points right to Jesus.
Yeah, it's so good. She responds to him like a Pharisee responds to Jesus, right? You're not who we expect. I know what I'm expecting, and you don't fit that mold, so I'm rejecting you. You must actually be the enemy. You're not only not who you claim to be, you are actually the opposite. You are the one who killed my love.
Jesus, the dread pirate Roberts.
Heard it here first, folks.
What does she say when they're up on the top of the hill?
You can die too for all I care.
Yes, she shoves him. And then after that willingness, that might as well be crucify him, right? You know what I mean? Like send him down the hill. And then as you wish, the true love is revealed that he was, willing to do this for her and all this stuff.
It is finished.
So close.
And she has the moment too, I'm sure, like some Pharisees did. Her first thing she says is, "What have I done?"
Oh, my
as
sweet
he's
Wesley.
rolling down the hill. Like, been 3 days.
Good.
Uh-oh.
So this idea of that unknown, inconceivable savior, we even try to push away sometimes. And I think all of us at some point in our lives, especially before coming to understand the love of Jesus in our lives, we have those moments where God is pursuing us relentlessly, and yet we're still pushing him away. I know that we can point to those moments in our story, but as you're listening to this, I think you can take comfort in the fact that God will never stop pursuing you. His love is inconceivable. And when you come to realize that, God is waiting to say, as you wish. This is what I want with you. This is the relationship that I've always desired. And like, it's like everything before never happened. The distance, the separation was never there.
We've touched on a little bit, but in a slightly different direction for me, something I see that belongs to Jesus is really what the idea of true love really is. True love really is the theme of this movie that kind of comes through. Like true love overcomes, conquers all. And I think they really do end up painting a picture of what's described, at least for me, in 1 Corinthians 13, 4-7. It's this love of mutual submission and sacrifice for one another. It's saying like love is patient, love is kind, doesn't envy, it doesn't boast, it's not proud, it's not easily angered, keeps no record of wrongs. We get this picture that from the beginning, the primary driver for Wesley, his way of saying I love you is this sacrificial saying of as you wish. Not as I wish, what I want, it's as you wish. It's always been this picture of loving you by doing for you, sacrificing for you, bringing you what you need rather than what I need. And the way that they engage with each other, you can tell that this love isn't just driven by like, hey, what do I get out of it? It's kind of going like, hey, how do I love you? How do I meet you in the spot that you're at? Particularly in Wesley's undying love that he has for Buttercup. And, let's fully Jesus juke it if we're going to go there and go like, we even get that truly sacrificial love enduring the pain of the machine.
I'm the machine!
and then ultimately having cramped up to 50 and dying. And then wouldn't you know it, the guy's resurrected by a chocolate covered something and saves the girl. Like we get the literal picture of Jesus' story here and the way that he's willing to go all the way to the end of the line and give up his own life for her. And wouldn't you know it, the guy comes back and saves the day.
I'm going to pull out some Hebrew. Oh, yeah.
College boy over here.
He went to seminary.
But anyway, the Hebrew word hesed, and that's translated this loving kindness or steadfast love or unfailing love. I think that we're pointing to that concept, that idea in what the Princess Bride is talking about with true love. True love is love that never fails, that's steadfast, that endures. And I think that when we look at Wesley and Buttercup, that love is what endures. That true love is what conquers death. That true love is what we see transform this story.
Speaking of the Hebrew word hesed, though, hesed, sorry, you gotta clear your throat when you say it. No, the book by Michael Card called Inexpressible, and it's all about that word hesed. Just because it's an inexpressible, untranslatable word, like there's no easy way to translate it. So yeah, he goes on a super long exploration of what this word means and the different ways it's used in the Bible, and he's got like a whole book long definition, obviously, but then he's got like a short definition that is when the one from whom you deserve nothing gives you everything. Buttercup doesn't deserve to be rescued. What has she done?
Yeah.
Right? Another example of what you were talking about earlier was the story of Hosea, the Hebrew prophet, and Gomer. Like God tells him, marry this woman. She won't be faithful, and you go get her. Right? You keep going after her, and you keep getting her to show my covenant, unfailing faithfulness to my bride.
One of the other things that I think belongs to Jesus in this story is this concept of not even death can stop true love. Now, we've already kind of talked about this concept of true love, this self-sacrificial, unfailing, steadfast love. Jeremiah 31:3, I've loved you with an everlasting love. I've drawn you with unfailing kindness. Song of Songs, chapter 8 says, love is as strong as death. Its jealousy is demanding as the grave. We have these ideas and concepts in Scripture. And we see this reflected in the story of the Princess Bride. Wesley is talking to Buttercup and says, hear this now, I will always come for you. You know, how can you be sure? This is true love. It doesn't happen every day. This sense of it being so rare, so powerful, that is something I think that absolutely belongs to Jesus. And I think even Buttercup, later in the movie, she's talking to Prince Humperdinck. She says, you know, we are joined by the bonds of loves. You can't track it with 1,000 bloodhounds. You can't break it with 1,000 swords. In this power in the pit of despair, where the torturer says to Wesley, because you have truly loved each other, no man in a century will suffer as much as you have. And the sound of ultimate suffering emits from Wesley as he dies for true love. That power is what resurrects him. That's what makes the miracle happen. That's what brings him back. And so I think when we look at this idea that, you know, love is stronger than death, not even death can conquer true love. It was God's unfailing love that drove him to the cross. And the night he was betrayed, when he's in the garden, he's asking if this cup could pass from him. He gives the ultimate as you wish. When he says to God, not my will, but your will be done. And so I think when we look at the unfailing love of Jesus reflected in the story of the gospel, we see an echo of that in the love of Wesley. The true love cannot be stopped even by death.
I wrote down another quote about that. When Wesley says, death cannot stop true love. All it can do is delay it for a while. Buttercup says, I will never doubt again. He says, there will never be a need.
Yes. Yes.
The last one for me that I think belongs to Jesus is simple, but I think still present, knowing your gifts and your strengths. There's this quote from Inigo who says, your brains, my sword, your strength. He knows what they bring to the table. It's Romans 12, 6-8. We have different gifts according to the grace given to each of us. And, you know, if your gift is this, do that. You know, if it's this, do that. Like kind of lists all these things out. But for me going like, Inigo's the one who pieces it all together. He's the guy who kind of goes, I can use all of this to my advantage, right? Like this is all the moving parts and pieces I need. And I feel like God and the Holy Spirit are doing that all the time of like, who are all the people I need to bring together and bring into the spot to kind of move my mission forward? Like they know our gifts, wirings, and how all this works. And so like, all right, I'm going to bring Simon over here on the board. I'm going to bring Taylor over here. I'm going to bring Chris over here. And they're going to talk about podcasts and they'll be fine. We'll see what we can do with that.
Oh, yeah. It's all coming together.
But in all these areas of our lives, it's knowing that, hey, your gifts and your strengths matter. They bring different things to the table that allow you to accomplish kind of these audacious things. Like, as they say in the movie, it's going to take a miracle. And you could say it's a miracle, but it's also like you just brought the right people together. You recognized the help that you needed and then the people who would actually be able to be there to pull it off. And I think that's sometimes what God is asking of us, both saying, hey, I can't do this by myself. I need to ask for help. And then we see some of the fruit in God's kingdom and in his mission when we're able to invite other people people in to be a part of that mission alongside of us. 'Cause sometimes we just get stuck. It's like, I got to figure it out, or I got to do it on my own. And God's going like, no, good to ask for help. We're meant to do this thing together.
There was this moment where Inigo is right next to the pit of despair but doesn't realize it. And he's at the end of his wits. He's trying to find. And I think this is where somebody who's at the end of their rope, they have no more answers for life. They feel like they've completely failed. They're kind of at this rock bottom moment. Inigo says, Father, I've failed you for 20 years and I need your help. I need you to guide my sword. There's a man somewhere nearby that can help us. Help me find him. And I think that there are so many people that are in that spot that Inigo was. You feel like maybe the life you've lived up to this point has just been utter failure. And you are at the end of your rope. And I think that that's often sometimes the place where Jesus is the most near. Jesus is waiting right there. And if you're willing to say a prayer very similar to what Inigo does in that moment, to ask God to guide you, to lead you to the one that can save you, that can bring you out of this pit of despair, out of this moment. If we can bring ourselves to that place, if you find yourself into that place praying that prayer, Jesus has never been more near to you than he is right there in that moment. And he's ready to bring you out of death and into new life.
All right, guys, so that is where we see this story uniquely connected to Jesus. And all those conversations are great, but so what? We can talk about this, but at the end of the day, go like, how's this really matter? What can we actually do with this?
One thing we like to talk to our kids about is how Jesus is better than, like Jesus is the better whatever. And you can do this in the Old Testament. Jesus is the better David. He's the better Abraham. He's the better Moses, the better Noah, like all these things. He's the better Wesley. Wesley is only compelling and cool because he reflects some of the characteristics of Jesus.
Yes.
Right? Jesus is the pure, undefiled, unfiltered Wesley, right? He is what Wesley could be if he was perfect.
Yes, and I think that you're getting at the heart of why this podcast exists, because we believe if something is good, if we love something, if we see something that has goodness in it, the only reason it's good is because it has something that belongs to Jesus. And so when we dive into those things, it becomes a place of conversation. It can be a pointing to Jesus is the better Wesley. The reason we love Wesley is because really Jesus is the fulfillment of this character and everything we long for and everything we admire, everything we want to see. I love that. You're striking right at the heart of what this is all about.
Told you I'm a fan. Big fan.
So, Chris, Taylor, you want to do some Love It or Leave It?
Absolutely, Simon.
Was hoping you would ask. I was holding my breath waiting for you to ask that very question. I was so excited.
So this is our opportunity to talk about what we loved and what we could have done without along the way, or sometimes just what we would call our hot takes.
Love It or Leave It, the falling sequence and the sound effects of Wesley and Buttercup falling down the hill.
It's so hilarious, though.
That's one of my favorite bits in any movie. This one has it, and then the other movie that had me giggling irrationally to that is the movie Hot Rod. If either of you have seen that movie, has Andy Samberg in it, and he's doing this dance in the forest to like get his feelings out, and he trips and falls down this hill. It's like the bigger version. They've like built upon that idea and like made it more extreme, and that is a bit that does not get old for me. That's right in the bullseye of my sense of humor.
About when Buttercup is falling from the window and there's this pause where it like zooms in on her face and the harp music and it's like she's like going down.
That's a Leave It. I hate that so much.
Every single time I watch, that's the only part of the movie where I go, I don't know about that one. Really? I still love it. I still love it because I love everything about this movie, but that is the one where I'm like,
Yeah, it's a little redeeming because it takes me out of the moment in a way that almost makes me giggle. But no, we're robbing the moment here.
Okay, Love It or Leave It, Wesley's tiny ponytail as the Dread Pirate Roberts.
He has a tiny ponytail?
He has a tiny ponytail.
No.
I did not think you were going to bring that up.
If you look in the sword fight with Inigo, it's just this little tiny ponytail that I have no idea why that would be there.
Is it a ponytail or is it his bandana?
No, it's a
his
ponytail.
It's like a girl who has a pixie haircut or like a very short haircut who's playing sports and has to have it back in a ponytail, you know? That's the kind of energy it has. Where it's like, that's not what that was made for.
I'm literally Google image searching and I still can't find it. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's there. It's not great. It's not great. But it shows that time has passed.
One for me that's a love it was the physical humor of Wesley being unable to move and being helped by Fezzik throughout the whole third act. There's such a commitment to the bit that I think is so good. And I'm a sucker for like physical or like slapstick comedy. And so for the whole time just like moving his head left, right, up, down. And then when they're on the little bridge before when they're looking over parapet, the 60 men, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, way to get the word parapet in.
Nice
well
work.
done, fantasy reader. And when Fezzik is so proud, oh wow, he's starting to like move a little bit, like that's so exciting.
You moved your thumb. You should be ecstatic. You were mostly dead for most of the day.
My brains, his sword, your strength against 60 men, and you expect a little head jiggle to make me happy? Such a good line.
That's great. Those little physical bits of him either being dragged through the hallway on their backs, setting them up against the coat, the set
coat
of
of
armor
arms
in the hallway is just so perfect. But if you were the actor in that, where it's like you get to just flop around while still acting and being your character, would just be so much fun to film. Like that, I love that every time. My low-key MVP in this movie, my secret favorite character, has got to be Prince Humperdinck's dad, the old king. Because up at the beginning when they introduce him, he's in the background, like when they're up at the top of the castle as Humperdinck's talking, he's just like nodding his head and just like going with it. I'm like, yes, very good. This is what we do. And then Buttercup says in the hallway in the third act, I'm going to kill myself in the honeymoon suite. And he goes, won't that be nice? She kissed me. Just got these little throwaway, useless lines, and I'm here for it.
I'm anticipating some division here, but love it or leave it, the distinguished clergy character.
Marriage is what brings us together today.
That's so iconic.
True.
Like, you can't...
Wow.
If he had just been a normal cleric just saying, like, welcome to the wedding. Let's get these two married. That would have been, like, totally forgettable.
Yeah, what are we
But
doing here?
This actor, must know he's got one line. And actually, I'm pretty sure, I'm going to look it up right now, but I'm pretty sure the accent, the list
It
is
comes
in the book.
through in the book. Where do you stand on this, Chris?
This is the leave it for me, just because it kind of annoys me. Like, I get the bit, and I get why we're doing it, but a part of me is like, that is not quotable to me. I hear other people quote that, and a part of me just, like, goes like, this is sandpaper to me. All right, guys, this movie is known nearly universally as one of the most quotable movies that has been made, much to some of these actors' suffering. And so with that in mind, we have a great opportunity here between the three of us to say, hey, what are your top 2 favorite quotes from this movie? If you had to choose just 2, which, Taylor, apologies, man, we're going to make you choose. But if you had to choose just 2, what make it to the top of the list for you? Yeah, I'll dive in first as the least experience of the trio here. Right at the beginning of the movie, one of my favorites is the grandpa. He says, when I was a kid, television was called books. That's just such a good grandpa line, and it works. But it's still so random. I just feel like that's something I'm going to be telling my grandkids someday of like, when I was a kid, phones were phones or something like that.
They weren't embedded in your brain.
So that's one right at the top of the list for me.
And we liked it. We thought it was great.
So the second one for me is from Wesley, where he says, life is pain, Highness. Anyone who says differently is selling something.
It's a good one.
That's a good line.
Again, so good. I feel like I hear a little bit of my father in that line. And again, it feels like one of those cutaways of like, I am speaking to you, the audience, in this culturally relevant quote. And then we're diving right back into the fantasy language.
I will give my favorite quotes, but not based on what my favorite quotes of the movie are, but the ones I actually quote the most. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. One of them is when Inigo is standing on the cliffs of insanity and they're looking down and Vicini keeps saying, inconceivable! Inigo looks at him and he says, you keep saying that word. I don't think that means what you think it means. And so I often say that in conversation with somebody. They say something, I'm like, I don't think that means what you think it means. I don't do a good Inigo, but I channel him there. The second one for me, again, this is a little bit buried, but for some reason, within some of my friends, this is one that we've latched onto and have said quite frequently. It's like, this is one of the classic blunders. Never get involved with a land war in Asia.
Only the second less well known is this. Don't go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line.
Yes.
Gosh.
Like, I don't know. Maybe it's because we're a bunch of like Risk nerds who loved playing Risk and like trying to, nope, don't take over Asia. It's like never getting involved in a land war in Asia. It's
so good.
Like, I don't know. There's something about it that has come up more times than it should have in my life.
The magic of that one is that could be such a throwaway line that you catch upon like your third or fourth viewing.
Yeah.
But once you hear it, you cannot unhear it.
So my top 2 favorite lines. It's an impossible question, but I think if I had to narrow it down, probably when Inigo finally faces Count Rugen and they're sword fighting and he's winning because he's the best sword fighter in the world. He's saying, offer me wealth. Yes, offer me everything I want. All this stuff. And Rugen's like, yes, all that I have and more. You can have it. He's just saying all this stuff. And then Inigo stabs him and says, I want my father back. And this is the only swear word in the entire movie. I won't say it on here because this is for polite company, but he says, I want my father back. I heard an interview with Mandy Patinkin, who played Inigo Montoya. He was talking about how before they filmed that scene, well, actually before the filming of the movie began, his father had actually died of cancer a few years before the filming of the movie. And he said that before they filmed that scene, it was actually in a castle. He was walking around the outside of the castle and he was preparing for this scene, this pivotal, this monumental, climactic scene in the movie. And he's picturing talking to the cancer. When he finally stabs Count Rugen and he says, I want my father back, he's not talking to Count Rugen. He's actually talking to the cancer that killed his father. And that's why that line just carries so much emotional weight. You see that real, raw emotion just pouring out of him in that moment because it is so real for him. He's not an actor on a stage in front of a camera in that moment. He's a child wanting his dad back. That is just a heartbreaking moment that just carries so well. So I love that line for that reason. My other favorite line, though, it's probably As You Wish, but it's the one delivered by the grandfather at the end of the movie. I tear up every single time. First off, when Peter Falk does that turn, that is just such a good turn. It just carries so much weight about it. He says, I think you could come back and read it again if you want. And just that pause, As You Wish. He's saying, I love you. That's just such a sweet grandfather-grandson moment that, oh gosh, it makes me tear. I'm starting to tear up right now thinking about it. I'm honest. What a way to end a movie.
Well, all good things must come to an end, including this episode.
Thanks so much for joining us for episode 9, and a huge thanks to Taylor Mugge for joining us on this very special episode. As a reminder, he's the host of the Hidden Acres podcast, available wherever podcasts exist. And Taylor, we hope to have you back again for another good story sometime.
As you wish.
And we hope that you had a good time with us as we walked through this good story, because our desire is that ultimately this is helping you grow the skill of finding the story of Jesus in the stories you're watching, and that it might spark spiritual conversations with the people you're watching with.
And we'd love to keep the conversation going with you because there's all sorts of other good stories and awesome nuances to explore. And you can track us down to talk about your thoughts, insights, and questions on Instagram at All Good Stories Podcast. We would love to keep the conversation going and keep learning from you.
And remember, all good stories belong to Jesus.
And if you choose to give your story to Jesus, you can be sure he'll make it a good one.